Are you ready to make some Valentine cards but already have piles and piles of patterned paper in your stash? Hi, I'm Jess from JessCrafts.com and I'm here to help you make the most of your crafty supplies and time. So let's get making. Today, I want to make some Valentine cards without adding something to my stash to go get new Valentine paper. Now, of course, you might already have Valentine paper in your stash, go for it. But today I have the Sweet Harvest paper from Craft Smith. It was sold at Michael's in the US and it had a sort of like pink and orangey tan gold theme going on. I did use this for some cards, like more autumn based cards in the autumn. However, I thought, why don't bring it back out and see if I can get some Valentine out of it because it has all of that pink. So there's this pink paper, which has a slight more autumn theme to it because of the floral grains sort of motif in it, but nothing really super autumn about it. These beautiful flowers could be used. There are definitely some pumpkins. This gold and pink could be used, but today I think I'm just going to use this simple pink gingham patterned paper, and it is single-sided. I am going to use my paper busting template, 12 by 12 paper busting template for A2 cards number 20. There'll be a link in the video description so you can pick up this free template. And I will be cutting it up to make 9 A2 cards with no patterned paper scraps. We are going to be needing some cardstock in addition to the patterned paper. And because you're making 9 A2 size cards, you're going to need 9 A2 card bases to use. So if you look at this sketch, each one of these, you're going to get a circle, a bigger rectangle, and a thinner rectangle or smaller rectangle, and that's all you're going to use on one card. This sketch needs non-directional patterned paper if you're doing it as shown, because this 1 by 4 inch piece is going to be turned on its side. And so if it had a directionality to it, like a clear top to the paper, then it would be turned on its side and it wouldn't look right. But this is non-directional pattern paper, so it works. And you can come up with ideas for how to make the non-directional pattern paper work. So instead, if I had a directional pattern paper, getting a little lost in my words here, and I wanted to use this sketch, instead of turning it on its side, I could put it down the center here and just put it behind and add an additional layer. That might not be everyone's preference. I could also cut that 4 by 1 inch piece to 2 by 1 inch and put it at the top and bottom so it would extend a little past, and I would be covering up that gap with this circle. I don't need to do that here, but if I were trying to make it the whole length of the card, that should work because you have a 2 inch circle and then you'd have 2 inches of pattern paper, which adds up to 6 instead, and the card will be 5.5. So that is one way I would do it with non-directional pattern paper. But basically I'm gonna need a bunch of 4 by 4 squares and I can work from there. So I'm cutting this to 4 by 12 inches and then I'm gonna cut it 4 inches off that. So I have 4 by 4. This 4 by 4 inch piece, I'm gonna do this 9 times. I'll show you once. I'm going to cut it to 3 inches. And then these are the 2 rectangles that I need. And now I need my circle. The circle I'm going to cut with my dies out of this pattern paper. And so I need to cut it in the place it will be on the final card. So since I want to center this circle on the final card, I'm going to find my infinity circle die that is as close to 2 inches as possible. And I am going to place that in the center here, get a little bit of low tack tape, tape it down, send it through my die cut machine, and I will do this 9 more times from the same piece of pattern paper. Because this is single-sided pattern paper, I'm not going to be able to mix up any of the patterns, although something that you could do, and I think would work well on this card, is you could turn the paper over for a white stripe instead of a gingham stripe. I think that's the name of this pattern. Or you could even do a really quick stamping onto that side of the patterned paper and just to add a little bit more interest or stenciling or something like that. So you can always add something to a white side of the patterned paper so that you can get a little bit more out of your single-sided paper. One of the nice things about this template is it's actually pretty good for using cardstock scraps. So because you only need the circle and then this scrap for the smaller rectangle, or sorry, this mat for the smaller rectangle, you don't need a bunch of cardstock. So what I is I went to my collection and picked out something that had a lot of scraps already. So like this light purple did. And in fact, some of the scraps were 8.5 long. And so I knew that meant that I could get 2 of the pieces that I would need for behind here because they are 4 1/4 by 1 1/4. So I can cut this to 1 1/4 and then to 4 1/4, and I will have 2 of those pieces that I need. And then I'm left with this 3/4 inch piece. And what I generally like to do with these is I will turn them into what I call fake foam tape, which might come up later, but you can also just save these scraps for other things, but it's like a relatively small scrap. So what I do is I just take 2 pieces of cardstock and I glue them together or adhere them together. And then I can use this to add a little dimension behind a like critter or saying or something on my card. These smaller scraps are also perfect for like cutting for sentiments. So that would be another way to use them. And then for the circle, I had another larger scrap. And so what I'm gonna do is take this circle die that I picked for my patterned paper and just take the next size up from my set of infinity dies. And that's why I like infinity dies. I also do own 3 sets of circle infinity dies, which, you know, obviously it's repetitive, but for me, because I like to make multiple cards, it can be really helpful to just like place 3 dies down at one time and send it through the machine. So now I have everything that I need to complete the card, and as you can see, where I die cut out, that circle is going to be covered by the circle mat that I created because it's slightly bigger. And then I also have this strip of pattern paper that goes here in the background with this mat around it. And I could use it all like this, and I think it looks really, I think it looks great as a like pattern on pattern on pattern. Like I don't think you need to add an additional pattern, but I thought that'd be something fun to show from time to time. So I'm actually gonna try to stamp on the back of this paper, and at least if I mess it up, I'll have the other side. At least hopefully I won't put ink on both sides. I just kind of looked at my collection, this heart to heart background stamp from Simon Says Stamp, and so I can make my own pattern paper. But I also thought something simple like these dots would work well, and so you don't even have to have like a Valentine specific, and not that, again, hearts are not Valentine specific per se, but what I'm gonna do is take some purple ink to kind of pull in the purple a bit more, and I'm just gonna put it on a section of this red rubber stamp here, and I'm going to press my patterned paper down into it. You might want to have like a scrap of paper behind it as well. I don't need to cover the whole thing, but I do want it to be a portion that would hopefully produce a complete heart for me. I think a piece of pattern paper here, maybe even, or sorry, a piece of scrap paper to help you press it down would be quite helpful. Okay. And then, yeah, because I probably pressed it a little too much, and that's why I have that smudge there from, but we might actually be covering that up, so we might be okay. Let's take a look. And we place it here in the circle. So I like having this heart to make it a little bit more obvious what I was trying to stamp here, because it is a relatively small piece of paper, but you could do a smaller scale pattern like the dots, and then you wouldn't have to worry about that so much. Also, I do have a little bit of smearing. Like I said, mostly it's covered up, like this, particularly this big blob here, but something that you could do, and I'm just trying to throw out a couple suggestions here, is you could also just kind of like add a little bit of ink on top of it, so that in that corner where I had another little mistake, it becomes a little bit less obvious. And you can either try to add like an overall bit of color to the background. You can just ink up the edges. I am using the same color of ink, but usually when you apply it blended, it will dry a little bit differently than it does stamped. So it's a very like sort of tone on tone pattern. I can wait for this to dry completely. Dye inks often dry back a little bit. So I do actually have these are from Jennifer McGuire. She made these like things you can print out and stamp on. And so I do have my Lawn Fawn inks on here so that I can kind of see what it looks like when it dries back completely, at least on white. And that can help me to make sure that I'm choosing a color, because sometimes when you stamp it, it's a bit darker. So I'll let that dry, and then I can have an additional piece of patterned paper for the background while still using up some single-sided patterned paper. I decided to cut a stitched banner die out of this strip so that it would perfectly coordinate. Of course, you could cut out of any other scraps, but just a little tip for saving some cardstock there. And then I stamped You're So Sweet from the scrapbook.com Berry Sweet stamp set. And I'm also going to be using this strawberry. You could, there's enough room. It says, I have just put You're So Sweet, but you could put Your Berry Sweet. Does that work? I think you'd have to cut off the or You're So Berry Sweet. That would be totally fine. Just to add a little bit more if you wanted to, or make it a little more punny. It does, this particular stamp set, while it does have, like, you know, the berries, the cherries, and the florals, a lot of these sentiments in it can be mixed and matched to create some pretty general cards, which I do appreciate about that stamp set. And then I'm going to be stamping some strawberries and using my Copic markers to color them in. I am stamping with Copic Safe ink. It is Lawn Fawn Jet Black. And when I'm using just a regular stamp block, these are kind of fine line stamps. The lines on the stamps aren't super thick. I find that that helps sometimes. Like a thicker stamped line can be harder to get a good image with just your block. You might want to use something like a stamp positioning tool. But when I'm stamping with my block, just holding it there for a little longer gives the ink a little bit more time to sink into the page. Now, if you didn't ink up a part of the stamp, there's not really any way around that. You can cut these out with a white border or without. I want to talk briefly about my Copic coloring, just because I think there's a couple things in here that I surprise people, or just, you know, different way of doing it. I know I'm going to cut these out on the black line. I don't have coordinating dies for this stamp set, and I could cut a sort of like white border around them, but the lines of these stamps are pretty thin, so that makes it a little more challenging to color inside the lines, to be honest, at least for me. So I'm just going to accept that I'm not going to color inside the lines, and I'm going to start with a dark pink marker. I am going to try not to color, like, I already messed up, but over into the leaf area. But in terms of the like outer lines, I'm not going to worry too much about it. I will trace in here though in the details, and that is why I like the brush tip of a Copic marker, because it does let you get into some pretty teeny tiny spaces. I'm also totally coloring right over the seeds because they're going to be a darker color, and so I can add that darker color next, and I don't have to color around them. That's what is helping me to color 9 of these relatively fast. I might spend a little bit more time cutting them because of the cutting on the black lines, and I'm going to show you a little trick around that. However, I think that, you know, it'll balance out in the end. So I will wait for the pink color to dry before I add the seeds in, but for the seeds, when I do have one that is dry, I'm just going to take the tip of the brush side of the Copic marker and just kind of trace that. I am going to be very like light-handed with my marker. I'm going to really just kind of touch it to the paper and try not to make too much contact. I'm going to allow myself to go a little bit more slowly with this part of the process because I was able to color more quickly in another part of the process. All right, then when it comes to fussy cutting, I'm going to work with a smaller piece of paper to start with. So I will cut out just one berry. And then a lot of times if I have some detail, I am going to do things like just cut off like large chunks that are easy, such as all along the edges of the berry here, just so that I have less extra cardstock that I need to manipulate around as I'm cutting. So just kind of every once in a while stopping and cutting a chunk completely off. I also do tend to like to move the paper more than my scissors. So like I'm kind of moving the paper to meet where my scissors are. Then, when I do have it fussy cut all the way out, I like to take a brush tip marker, which I have lost somewhere on the mess of my desk. Hopefully I'll find that because I just grabbed an extra one because I can't find it anywhere. But that's okay, that's sometimes why it is nice to have extras. I don't have an extra of a ton of things. But anyway, I like to then trace around that black edge to kind of cover up any of my mistakes where I didn't maybe get exactly to the black line. I basically am just drawing the black line back in. Normally this might be, or sorry, sometimes this might be white space instead, like if you colored in the lines to begin with, but it's maybe perhaps a little bit less noticeable here because it does match the color of the inside of my stamp. But, oh, sorry if that was a little out of focus. And now I am ready to complete the card. I had originally colored a red strawberry, but I really just didn't think it worked well for this card. So I kind of brought in like a purpley pink color for my strawberry in the end. And I will continue to follow all of these steps to create the 9 cards that I need. I will start doing things a little bit more in batches. Like you can kind of see I already started with the coloring, like just coloring a whole bunch of berries or stamping all of these strips at one time. As you can see, it's been drying back for a while now. And so the sentiment is quite subtle on the card. You could choose a darker color of ink, and also here on the background where I blended over those hearts, it's created a much more subtle patterned paper. And so the way that I would address that is maybe picking a lighter color for the ink blending or a darker color, but picking like 2 different colors if you wanted that to stand out a bit more. And so I kept going until I created 9 complete cards with 1 piece of 12 by 12 single-sided patterned paper, making cards with a general Valentine's theme, even though this was from a fall paper pad. If you like this video, here's another video where you can find more ideas for enjoying your crafty time and supplies. Let me know you like this video with a share to your crafty community, subscribe and click the bell so you don't miss the next template or tutorial, and check the video description for product links. See you in the next video.